my background is ecosystem services modeler, and I focus on the ecosystem services that agricultural landscapes can provide. And my story as a ontology user will be emphasizing as well how the ecosystem services approach can help us designing multifunctional and sustainable farming systems. But before I keep unpacking why we need to think about multifunctional and sustainable farming systems, let me refresh of the way how I see the agriculture programs development, variety selection, and species selection that we need to promote, or what is the context that agriculture is facing right now in the Anthropocene era. So let's remind that 5 out of the 9 planetary boundaries are beyond or in zones of uncertainty, including climate change, biosphere integrity, that means the genetic diversity loss, land system change, freshwater use, phosphorus and nitrogen cycles are heavily altered. So another challenge that we have is global malnutrition. So we have still a large proportion of our population that is facing micronutrient deficiencies or food insecure, or on the contrary, they are facing overweight or obese issues. Then the area that we have for promoting agriculture development or increasing the production of food that we need to better feed our population is around 30% is experiencing land degradation from medium to strong levels. And at the same time, the area that we have left, or the area that we can expand agriculture, is area that is not as productive. So we need to find ways of how to restore and how to work or improve agriculture in these areas, even though they are degraded. And on top of that, the climatic projections, particularly as indicated by the IPCC, is highlighting that some regions that are food insecure are going to become even more insecure due to the average decline in yields for the major crops by 2050. So, and all these challenges, agriculture has been playing a role as well on causing or leading to these challenges. But the way how I see it is in a more positive way. And I think that agricultural diversity can help as well addressing those different challenges. And that means moving from one crop to moving multiple crops, and to recognizing not only the traits of one crop, but also recognizing the traits and the characteristics of the agricultural biodiversity, including trees, including non-crops. So that means how we can measure our landscapes or our farming systems to provide habitat or pollination or pest control, or habitat for species that can provide services like pollination or pest control. How we can also promote different or value the different crops based on the nutritional contribution. And also, what are the traits of the different crops that can help to retain, for example, soil in the farm, or improve or mitigate the impact of water erosion and reduce the land degradation. And at the same time, we can actively use farms as a area for preserving our genetic diversity. So that's the way how I see it, and how I see, or how we are trying to conduct our work and using the ontologies. So we are trying to look at what is the information collected for these different crops. For different crops, I don't know what I did. Sorry. Undo. Okay, done. It's just to see if you were paying attention. So hopefully here we are on the same page. So in our team with Elizabeth and Maria Angelique and Sarah Jones, we have been trying to integrate the ecosystem services approach and try to identify what are the gaps and what are the next steps and how we can improve the use of the ontologies. And then, so we know that from the current ontology, so is a great starting point where it includes functional traits that are important for plant breeders, crop biologists, agronomists, and ecophysiologists. And they focus on domestication syndrome traits. And there's a high emphasis on collecting traits that are related to yield. But then if I want to look at other information or the role of other crops, for example, in terms of soil fertility or the contribution of the quality of the green manure in terms of soil fertility or pollination or pest control, that information is scattered. And usually using different terms or different names, which makes it difficult to pull it together, to bring it together for a person like me as a modeler that want to integrate the information of different crops. So then from these, one of the parts that we learned is that we need to bring into the table what agroecologists have been using to assess the functional traits, not only the functional traits, but also the trait diversity, and not only for one crop, but also at the community level for the different crops, and also including non-crops and including trees. And then hopefully, and the idea of identifying these different crops is to predict, manage, and enhance the multiple critical ecosystem functions and services other than yield alone. As Martin and Isaac put it or mentioned it in their special issue, a very interesting special issue on agroecology and traits for sustainable agriculture. So then, and I invite you all to look at this very interesting special issue. Then we need to bring as well nutritionists, because at the same time we have been using metrics that are biased. They focus only or they measure calories. But we know that we need more information rather than energy. We need to know more about the nutrient profile of the different food items. So vitamin A content, iron, zinc, calcium, which are problem nutrients in many regions. And of course, we need to include as well socioeconomic information like labor cost or labor demand for a particular crop, or also cropping cost. And that can help us as well when we model different cropping systems to identify, or crop combinations to identify which crops will demand more labor and which intervention on, for example, implementing a variety or a new crop, how that is going to impact the livelihoods of the household in terms of, lower, higher cost or less leisure time. So another limitation that we found is that, as Elizabeth mentioned, the crop ontology it has been a collective effort and a huge effort trying to describe more than 23 or 27 crops, but yet this is not close to the wide diversity that we have in our cropping systems, and we need to incentivize people or find ways to incentivize people to start describing other crops that can play an important role. Nutritious and underutilized species or other tree species as well. And another next step that we need to think about is to break the silos of thinking of one crop, and we need to bring together all the people, all the people involved in the crop development or variety selection or species selection, and we need to identify at least core traits that are measured across different crops. For example, here for maize, we have quality traits, and we include, for example, grain iron content, and they also measure water index. But then we don't know that information is not being recorded for per millet. So then when I'm going to look for information for the different crops, I'm going to find that maize is more data complete than millet. And then many of these traits are also related to key ecosystem services that can also favor a more peer-to-peer comparison about the performance of the different crops. So then I know that what I'm saying, it can be add complexity, or we need to think more about ecosystem services, a new term, or it will get things more complicated, but I don't think that's the point. My point is more optimistic than the image. And I think that many of the crops many of the traits that are being measured right now, those are directly linked with ecosystem processes and also linked to ecosystem services. We just need to also bring in the table that thinking and say like, okay, this trait is important for A, B, or C, and this needs to be measured across different crops. And hopefully we don't need, and luckily we don't need to start from the scratch. So we already have a good framework that was proposed by Gael, Marie, and Eric. And then they propose how to systematically start thinking and looking at the different traits in agroecosystems using the seizure rules. And in my case, in our particular case, we have been using farm design. That is a whole farming system model. And what it does is it incorporates some information related at the crop level, at the farm level, and at the household level, and incorporates also information on different aspects, socioeconomic, environmental, productivity, and nutrition. So this is not a comprehensive list, and it doesn't include, for example, pollination, pest control, or other services, but at least it's a starting point and it's a pragmatic point that let us explore what we can do if we have complete information for the different crops. So what the model does is that it uses a Pareto optimization. So let's imagine that I have my original farm here, and this is the crop combinations and the areas allocated to the different crops. And then I want to maximize for soil, organic matter, and operating profit. And then what the model does is it's going to identify what happens, what are the different crop combinations and areas allocated to the different crops or management practice or that are closer to an optimum, so to the Pareto edge. And also, beyond identifying new crop farm compositions and configurations, it also helps us to identify trade-offs. So if we propose introducing certain crops, what is going to happen with the farmer's profit? What is going to happen with the leisure time? And also, so in the model, what is interesting about this model is that we don't only optimize for yield, we can optimize for nutrition, functional nutritional contribution, to human or to the household. We can optimize for nitrogen fixing and all the other information that we can gather around the different crops. So one specific example is in Do and Ket. This is a representation of a farming system, and these are the different crops that we are considering. We characterize and describe all the different crops in terms of the yield, the quality of the green manure, also the nutrient profiles for the different food items that are used for selling or for consumption, and so on. And then what this model can help us is to identify, okay, if we increase, and then this was embedded in a project in a CRP, Humid Tropics, supported by the CGIAR. And the goal was to promote crop diversification of these crops in circles: peanuts, mustard greens, sweet potato, pumpkin, bean, water spinach, and French beans. And as a strategy to improve nutrition, and as a strategy as well to improve livelihoods. And then what we can see with the model is that we can see what farm configurations can have an optimum in terms of like maximum vitamin A contribution for consumption, or also leisure time and household free budget. But at the same time, we can see as well the trade-offs. So the more household free budget we have, or resources to expend, so we are going to have less leisure time. So now we can put our agriculture development policies and practice and interventions into a context that we can also analyze it with farmers and how impact these policies directly to the farmer through this social ecological, but also we can look how they impact. We can look at the impact at the environment through the ecosystem services, increase or reduction, as we see here. When we look at the optimal, so there's very few crop configurations that have positive organic balance. So that means that with crop diversification, we also need to look for organic matter or soil fertility strategies for maintaining or improving soil fertility strategies. So I guess my conclusion is we have all the ontologies that are already available are a great starting point. But I think that if we start thinking about which traits are linked to key ecosystem processes and then key ecosystem services, then that can facilitate identifying which traits we need to make sure that we are measuring it, we are collecting it, and we are describing it across different crops. So then we can propose, or we can propose and identify policy and interventions that are lead to the multifunctional and sustainable farming system that we need right now. And I think I'm over the time. Thank you.